Welcome to the podcast. We Do Recover with Jared Miller, your host.
And I'm Dr. Terry Sellers, your co-host.
This is a podcast about recovery from addiction.
We want to talk about what successful recovery can look like.
Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center and the St. George Hilton Garden Inn.
It is officially Friday, a little bit past 4 o'clock, which means we are doing another episode of We Do Recover. Welcome, you guys. This is episode 94 of We Do Recover. We got a pretty good one planned for today.
This is going to be a big one.
It's going to be a great one.
Looking forward to it.
We have two authors, coaches, mentors that have written a book that are coming on to talk about that book and to talk about adolescence and addiction today. Before we get to them and introduce them, episode 94 is brought to us by Steps Recovery Centers. Steps Recovery Centers is ready to help you or a loved one get help as soon as you're ready to reach out. Reach out by giving them a call at 801-800-8142 or just go to their website. That's stepsrc.com. They have detox, inpatient, outpatient, aftercare. They have you covered from start to finish. Reach out to Steps. Thank you for sponsoring this podcast.
Yeah, they're good to us for sure.
We also got episode 94, part 1 is also sponsored by
Rise Up Sups.
Rise Up Supplements. At Rise Up Supplements, you go to riseupsups.com. That's RISEUPSUPS.com.
How many P's?
Just one P.
Okay.
That has been the question of the week ever since we launched the platform. We got two products right now. We have Mindful Mood. Mindful Mood helps decrease anxiety and enhance mood. And then we have Mind Shift. Mind Shift is going to increase focus and optimize brain function. So be sure to check out those products. We actually have an exclusive offer just for our podcast listeners. If you go to the website and you want to try one of those products, I get it, right? They're brand new products. A lot of people haven't tried them. At checkout, you type in TRY40. That's TRY40 to save 40% off. That deal ends at midnight the 31st. We're not putting it on social media. It's a podcast exclusive promo. Get 40% off your one-time purchase to give it a shot. Then come back and subscribe and save 20% off on a monthly subscription moving forward. Pretty sweet deal.
Yeah, 40% off's not bad, huh?
I mean, me and Mandy are going to lose our pants off of it, but
no, you're not.
It's fine.
It's going to do well.
Cool.
This is Jared's thing, so he's gonna knock it out of the park.
Adolescence and addiction.
Yeah.
To talk about that, we have invited on Hollie Henderson and Josh. Is it Brazier? Brazier?
Yeah, Brazier's fine.
Brazier.
Brazier like Frasier.
Well, Terry,
Yeah, exactly.
thank you so much. Why don't you go ahead and these guys sent us bios. They got a book out. Bang your head
way
here.
too professional for us.
Why don't you go ahead and read Hollie's?
I'm going to read you some stuff about Hollie, and then I'm going to let Hollie tell her own stuff, obviously. But so Hollie has been training teens and adults for over 20 years. Her training work began in the field of violence prevention and dating violence prevention. Hollie has trained thousands of teens and young adults on recognizing the warning signs that lead to violent and deadly relationships. She was a presenter at the International Conference for Family Violence, where she assisted other communities looking to develop their own dating violence prevention programs. Hollie is an active parent-teen coach who specializes in working with at-risk teens and young adults and their parents. She understands the struggle and nuances of these relationships primarily because she once was an at-risk teen who has found a way to reconnect within a family structure that once was failing. Her focus during coaching is to find a place where ownership and forward movement can happen while working on healing destructive patterns of disconnect and trauma that often lead to addiction and violence in the home. Hollie has tools and advice to help parents see outside of their lives into their minds of teens. They will learn how their past conditioning is limiting their ability to see things correctly, how their default settings lock them in a pattern for disconnect, how their communication styles are pushing their loved ones away, and what teens really want in order to thrive. That is Hollie, and we're going to ask her a lot more about herself, but that is an introduction to Hollie, right?
Beautiful bio.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Hollie,
welcome to the podcast.
What did you say?
I said, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I was expecting one sentence, but that was lovely. Thank you.
That was well, I shouldn't have stopped during the periods in the sentences. I should have just made it into one sentence. Would have been the world's longest sentence. But that's Hollie. We got to know Hollie. So
Get to know Josh?
Yeah, let's introduce Josh real quick. We're going to read a little bit about Josh, and then we'll let Holly and Josh talk.
Josh Brazier. With over 15 years of experience working with youth and family in over a dozen countries, Josh brings a unique perspective to healing and family culture. Having worked alongside thousands of young people and having been inside hundreds of struggling households, Josh's experience has led to deep and powerful insight that helps create a new path of healing. Josh's very direct and powerful real-world stories engage audiences and provide validity to the concepts and principles he teaches. Having worked for the past decade creating social programs for youth in the U.S. and abroad, Josh brings his 15 years of experience working with youth to help solve real pain point problems that youth are facing. His ability to connect and to get to the heart of the matter with young people keeps his roster and waiting list full. Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Got to figure out who wrote that one.
Did you pay him enough? That's my question.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, let's kick this off, shall we?
Well, we've read their bio.
Right.
I kind of want to get to know them a little bit more, and like why youth, why addiction, why working with families that are having these problems.
Yeah, I think we want to get into that in the first segment for sure. So, you want to lead it off? You want me to?
Go ahead.
Well, we read Hollie's bio first. So, Hollie, we're going to ask you the first question. Tell us just a little bit about yourself. Like, I don't want to know about your professional stuff yet, and you don't have to reveal any great details, but just tell us a little bit about Hollie.
I was born and raised in Southern California. Like it said before, though, I was an at-risk teen. So I did spend some time away from home, trying to deal with the problems that were going on at home. Came back from that into recovery, I started songwriting to kind of just deal with emotions, and then started pursuing that as a professional career as well. And then while I was doing that, I started doing some training at a nonprofit where I really started to do a lot more work with teens. So I'm into music, I'm into good food, I'm into traveling, and what else do you want to know? I think that's enough.
That was beautiful. I got a weird look from Jared when you said you're into good food, and I don't know what that was about. But
what's your definition of good music and good food? It was kind of my question.
Oh, okay, good.
Like, what's your forte?
Well,
you know.
I know. Good food sometimes revolves around the culture that you're in. So I like to travel and find little like special towns that do something really, really well, right? Or pastries. I love pastries. So I'm always on the hunt to find the best kringle, the Danish pastry kringle. The best one I found so far is in Santa Barbara at Anderson's Bakery, I will say. As far as music, the best good music, man, that varies, right? That's a loaded question.
What
as a songwriter, I'm studying a lot of different music. So
fair enough.
What would you call your personal style in music?
Ooh. So if you were going to come to one of my shows, you would enjoy jazz.
She has shows.
You would enjoy alternative rock, folk, a little bit of pop, and some adult contemporary stuff. So I definitely don't do rap. I'm sorry, I just can't pull that one off, guys.
Well,
if you're into that,
it's totally fine.
Don't look at me. Look at me. When they define rap and then they wanted to define the opposite of rap, they show a picture of me.
They show a picture.
They show
of
Doc
you.
Sellers.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to know Josh.
Okay.
Josh, tell us a little bit about yourself. Maybe why you decided to go into the field that you go into, why you're passionate about it, but you as a father, husband, let's get that.
All that good stuff. Cool. Well, I am a single dad, adopted 2 sons from Mexico. I got started with all this because when I was in college, I started a nonprofit that took like college students that were just in and around to orphanages. We started off in Mexico, then we branched off to Brazil, and then went to Africa, India, Peru, all over the world. And so from that just became like a huge love of travel. Hollie and I grew up basically in the same town, love Southern California, love the beach, love the ocean, surfing, all those different things. And we just try to had a really good childhood and was able to travel and have a really kind of wide view of the world. And on my trips, I'd have tons of young people coming on them. And a lot of times afterwards, I get a call from a mom or a dad saying, "Hey, my kid's struggling. They really connected with you on the trip. Would you mind taking them out to lunch, dinner, having a chat with them?" And then just this informal mentoring happened. And then I just got involved in the treatment world in Utah as well for a long time, taking groups of at-risk youth to these countries that I was working at, and then also the projects that I had there, and just getting them involved. So kind of a natural thing. I studied advertising in college, had no intention of really kind of doing this. I say I do this part-time, but it really can be full-time work. Like I said, just kind of like a weird zigzaggy way of getting there, but just definitely love it and all the connection that happens because of it.
It sounds like you almost fell into this thing, like it was put in your lap.
I think so. I think that we thought that this nonprofit that we started back in 2005 was going to be a semester-long project, and it just grew and grew and grew. We've taken over 5,000 people across the world to tons of countries. I've done a lot of good working with tens of thousands of people. So I've had a lot of good fun doing that. But my favorite part is when I take some kid who's struggling and have the chance in one of these countries to work alongside them and open them up a little bit with the service work that we're doing, and then just kind of figuring out what's going on and trying to help them get on a better path.
I love it, man. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I got some questions.
All right, shoot.
All right, let's go. You said you basically grew up in the same hometown. Did you know each other growing up?
Yes. So yeah,
I actually thought that answer was going to be no. I really did.
Hollie and I were at like a little different grades, and we lived maybe 8 miles from Agora to Newbury Park. But
it's nice of you to say that. It's nice of you to say that Hollie's 20 years younger than you. That's really nice of you to say.
Exactly.
I like it.
But yeah, we didn't hang out or anything like that. But it just, we're catching up a few years later. Maybe in 2009, 2010, I think it was. And then we just kind of figured out that in the last 10 years, we've been kind of doing the same things and kind of brainstormed this book from that first lunch that we had of just from our frustrations and what we were seeing and what was going on. We just thought there had to be some better tools and resources available to families and to young people. Right.
That actually leads me right into a question for Hollie.
Yeah.
So at what point did your guys' paths recross and you figured out that you were both working in the same field to help, adolescents, at-risk adolescents? And at what point was the book mentioned? And maybe talk to us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, I think I knew he was in a certain state I was traveling to, so we met up for lunch, and I was telling him that I had just finished doing a pretty hefty round of training with youth, and I was also in the lockdown facilities in the jails, and when he was telling his stories about what he was working with at treatment center, we just both felt frustrated that there was all this work happening with the teens, but there just wasn't a lot of great resources for the parents. And in my past, in being an at-risk teen, the things that changed the most in the home is when my parents were able to understand that there was a lot of treatment and work they needed to do while I was going through that process. And Josh was feeling very overwhelmed too with this thing where he just felt a lot of parents wanted to sign a check and say, "Return my teen to me, all patched up and good, and let's move on." And we're like, no, this is a systems thing we have to start addressing. But what kind of resources are out there for parents that allow them to take a look at it this way? And we're like, well, not a lot, So why don't we take our experiences and our stories and write this book? We came up with the title "Bang Head Here" because that's literally what it feels like when you're working with a teen that's really struggling, and also when you're working with a parent that doesn't want to get on board with the systems idea and take ownership of their part of the connection and the culture of their family. It's just like banging your head against the wall. But we would laugh that they would just want to do the same thing, same problems. We'd give them the same coaching, and then they wouldn't change it. And so that was how the book got started. And it's a 3-part series. The first one is called "You in the Equation," which it really talks specifically about understanding how powerful your role is as a parent and how much influence you have with your young ones in the home.
Yeah. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So this is a podcast about recovery from addiction, right? And you guys have worked with youth. Would you say the majority of the youth that at risk or troubled youth that you've worked with have a substance abuse problem or some kind of addiction? Josh, go ahead and shoot.
I would say so. Currently, my roster right now is at 35, and I would say that more than around 2/3 of them are dealing with some type of an addiction, whether it's substance abuse or whether we want to call it a online addiction, a gaming addiction, things like that. So there's definitely addiction's a huge part of daily talks with my clients. Yeah.
Yeah, good. All right. So I had a, excuse me, man, I got something in my throat there. I had a couple of questions. I wanted to talk a little bit about the book, first of all. So you guys, so you meet for lunch in a state where Holly's visiting. And is that when the idea for the book came about? Is that when it started, I guess?
Yeah, I think we were at, I want to say, was it a Mimi's cafe? It was a cafe of some type. I can't remember what it was, but we were just kind of brainstorming and getting caught up. And then, yeah, really quickly after that, we started brainstorming an outline for a book, and we put together our first draft and sent it out to some of the parents we're working with, and they just kind of gave us the feedback that you got to go deeper. This book is very personal. It has tons of personalized stories, Holly stories in there, but we talk a lot about pain and discomfort and how that kind of makes us act and show up certain ways in our relationships, and it creates certain cultures in our home. And so Holly and I had to do a really deep dive on our own pains and discomforts and things that were happening in our own lives to really make sure that we were just going to be able to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk in a lot of this. And so a lot of the brainstorming was happening over lunches and just sharing stories and, hey, I've got this going on. What would you do? And then the outline just started coming together.
I mean, you guys know as you're working with addiction, that if we're going to look at the family as a systems type of environment, and you see a young person that has an addiction, they could look to their parent and probably find something that the parent is trying to treat themselves in an unhealthy way. Right. And so we talk about that in this book is like, hey, before you start pointing fingers at your young one that's in rehab, I want you to take a look at when something is uncomfortable or painful in your parenting or in your life, what are you doing to cope with that, to self-soothe? Are you buying packages that are making you go into debt that are showing up on the front porch? Are you just completely avoiding your relationships and numbing out in other ways, or getting involved in your work? Is it substance abuse? There's a variety of ways that parents can take a look at themselves and go, wow, like how have I taught my young ones to deal with discomfort and pain that comes with everyday life?
I find that super interesting. So I recently stopped, but for a little over a year, I did all of the family programming for STEPS recovery centers. I'm a substance abuse counselor for them. And oftentimes when we would have family groups where it was just the family, right? The client wasn't there. It was just the families together. They would almost get offended when I would bring up what you just said, Holly, right? Like, so we have Johnny or Susie in care. Great. You know, they're getting help. If they're like this soaked sponge with all of these raw emotions and habits and behaviors, and we're taking them and we're giving them a good ring, what's going to happen if you guys, if they return to you and you're still full of all that resentment and all those memories you're harboring and all of that, in other words, how do you contribute, right? And I love that this is you in the equation, because the person who maybe is seeking help definitely needs to take a look at their accountability, but also the family members, they do contribute in some way, even if they don't realize it.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen plenty of times that addiction can also be rooted in lack of connection. So we all can take a look at that in the family. What point did my young person not feel connected, feel like they were going through something very difficult, that they sought out the strongest voice, whether it was the community they were hanging out with that introduced them to what they were addicted to, whether it was being online and pornography, a variety of things. But when we feel connected to each other, we feel filled in a much different way, right? And we can talk about these things in a much different way. And so I was even talking to a parent about this today. She's struggling with her teen boy who has a drug addiction, has relapsed. And her first instinct is to take everything away. I'm going to take the phone away. I'm going to take all these things. I'm like, wait a minute. Let's get to the root of the trigger first. What triggered this to happen?
Right.
And let's start having a conversation and feel connected and understanding so that you can actually help him facilitate this and help him give him the tools he'd never had before. And, you know, he was just desperate to do whatever he could to get out of his pain. Whether that was anxiety with school or at home, you know. In this particular case, there's a lot of violence in the home, verbal violence. So there's some escapism with the teen when that shows up. And so that is hard to get parents to address, like, oh man, shoot, I do need to be vulnerable to look at this because it's painful, right? And the frustration that you're having going into that group is what we were having. So we figured if we could write about it and give somebody a safe space to go and read that on their own and digest it, it would help us have more productive conversations when we get them into a situation with coaching or with treatment.
Okay, so I got to admit that I have not read the book yet, which is
We got to get some copies.
which I will do. I
We'll
promise.
send you some copies.
We would
you
love
guys.
that.
Please,
Yeah.
that would be lovely. But yeah, if you'll send us a few copies, we'll give a few away on the podcast, and then plug you guys every time we do a podcast for a while.
Yeah,
Anyway,
we'd love it.
the point is, I haven't read the book yet, but I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You decide to write a book. The target audience of your book, is it the teen? Is it the parents? Is it the family system? Obviously, I know the answer to that, I think, but tell me what what were you trying to do with this book?
It's interesting that our main thing was we wanted a parent who was flying from New York to Utah to be able to finish our book on one flight. They could come and be prepared for a family days or for whatever it was. And so we wanted to keep each part really short, but filled with stuff. And so, yeah, we're talking with the parents, and we're helping the parents to understand their family system, their family dynamic, their family culture, and what needs to change. And like what we were talking about earlier, like sometimes in a group, when you call a family out or when they feel like it, they just, you know, pride just rears its head and they shut down. But we wanted to create a book that with stories, with them being able to connect with, like, oh, I can relate to that. And oh yeah, I've been there. And then we just start to kind of chip away at that wall that they have up that says, I got to look at all of that, and that includes me. And so that was our intention. We were writing the book too, and why.
So
We also
go ahead.
we
Holly.
also changed the verbiage, because at first when we did our first draft, it was for parent and teen, but we realized that there are so many people that fill that role as parents, so it became loved one and caretaker. So that means we do a lot of work with young adults right now that are kind of the failure to launch, so that would help with that demographic, with teens, but also grandparents, aunts, or uncles that are standing in to be the parent role.
So is that the target audience then?
It's the loved one.
The loved one, the parent, the caretaker, the whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I would love to get some of those stories from the book, maybe in the second part of this. I realize we're coming up on the 2-minute mark here for part one, but so here's, I guess, the thing that I was thinking about, Holly. You said a word that stuck in my brain. You said connection, and I know young people, especially, they mistake connection with social media with true connection. Are you guys finding that young people are having harder and harder times generating real connection?
Yeah. And then when they're in that environment, they feel anxious because it's something that has to be practiced. I mean, even think about it as adults in COVID, you know, being in the lockdown, and how many adults had anxiety going into a social situation, being out of practice. And you got all these young kids that aren't doing the dialoguing like they normally would. Everything's like through text, or, you know, maybe to have a few outings.
I think that's still happening. Me and Mandy, like a week ago, went to the movies, and there's like a group of people talking normal voice behind us, and people's phones are ringing, and it's like, has everybody lost their mind? Have we all forgot what happens when you go to a movie? You turn your phone on silent. You know what I mean? If you have to whisper something, that's probably okay, but you don't talk full. You know, I think we've all kind of forgotten social norms to some degree.
For real. Josh, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, every single young person has their code and their language. And a lot of what Holly and I do when we're talking with these young people is to understand when they say yes, when they say no, when they say maybe, when they say I don't know, what does that actually really mean? And so a lot of this social media stuff has really made that job a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. Hey,
But it does leave
Josh,
so much up for.
we're just about out of time, so I'm going to cut you off right there. But we're going to take a quick break, listen to our sponsor, a word from our sponsors, and we'll be back right after the break. You're listening to We Do Recover with Jared Miller.
You are listening to We Do Recover with Jared Miller and co-hosted by Dr. Terry Sellers. We'll be right back after this short break with more of We Do Recover with Jared Miller, sponsored by Steps Recovery Center and the Hilton Garden Inn.
I'm Desmond Lomax, one of the clinical executives here at Steps Recovery, and once you become the Steps family, you're just a part of the Steps family. A lot of us have overcome substances, overcome addiction, and now we're able to help other people. Second of all, we're also going to help you in a way where you can afford to be helped. Third of all, we're going to give you the same quality that many organizations are charging 2 to 3 times, and it's more about you than it is about our organization.
We welcome you back to We Do Recover with Jared Miller, co-hosted by Dr. Terry Sellers. Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center and the St. George Hilton Garden Inn. And now with part 2 of our podcast, Jared Miller and Dr. Terry Sellers.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We're part 2 of We Do Recover with Jared Miller. We're talking with our guests, Hollie Henderson and Josh Brazier. For those of you that are listening, I just chopped Josh off as he was mid-sentence. I'm sorry about that. But before we get back into this segment, segment 2 of We Do Recover with Jared Miller is brought to you by the Hilton Garden Inn. Hilton Garden Inn is right here in St. George. Now, there's Hilton Garden Inns in other places too, but the one that sponsors us is here in St. George. So if you are traveling through southern Utah, give them a shot at your business. Hilton Garden Inn, just do a quick Google search. They'll pop up. Man, they have great stuff. It's a beautiful hotel. Rooms are clean, staff is friendly, pool and hot tub are amazing because that's what we usually do, right? We spend some time in the hot tub occasionally,
Very frequently, yes,
even when
in
it's
the
raining.
rain.
Yeah, yeah. And so anyway, give them a shot. The Hilton Garden Inn, they'll take good care of you. All right, let's get back to it. We were talking a little bit about the book, and we've kind of gotten started on the book itself, as to kind of what was the motivation and how they got started doing this.
I wanted to get into like some specifics, some
good.
stories, some
good. Let's get into the book a little bit.
Approaches to treating people, working with the families.
Yeah, let's get into the book a little bit. So this is so I asked them who their target audience was basically, and I thought they were going to say the family system, but it really might be the person taking care of the loved one that's struggling is what I got out of that. Did I get that correctly, you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So there's the target audience is those who are in the family system or in the system, whatever it is, whether it's a family or a non-traditional family, in the system, taking care of someone who is struggling with connection.
And I would want to ask, what are maybe some of the reasons why a young person struggles or is all of a sudden in crisis? I don't know which one of you want to tackle that. Hollie, let's have you start off with that. Like most commonly, what are the things that
we talked about this actually in the book, because a lot of times the parents will come and go like, what, I don't know what happened. Like everything was good. And all of a sudden my teen is off the rails.
Which we see in relapse all the time, right? Like, oh, Johnny or Susie was doing great for 6 months. They were doing fantastic. And then just one day they all of a sudden relapsed.
Yeah. And we try and teach them that, like, especially with the first crisis, big crisis that they're noticing, that the teen that they're working with or young adult that they're working with has been in crisis for a long time. They just haven't recognized the warning signs. So then we teach them how to recognize those warning signs in the book. And some of it can be crumbling from pressures at school. Some of it, a lot of times, can be crumbling from the expectation of what's in house or home, or they're feeling lonely at home, or religious expectations. There's a variety of things that make people start to go into crisis mode. And then usually the thing that they reach for is the loudest voice. What I mean by loudest voice, it could be the group that they're hanging out with, that they feel connected to, is introduce them to something that will help relieve the pain that they're going through. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. And I feel like at that point, it's just a snowball effect, right? Like I think of me and my family system with my addiction. It's like once people knew that I had an addiction problem, then it was just way more uncomfortable and it was way more stressful. And it wasn't like, well, what can we do to help? It was like, you just need to stop. You just got to stop.
Yeah.
Right. And you talk about pressure with somebody who at this point's already physically dependent on something. Just saying no was not going to work at that point. And so, like I said, it's a snowball effect because sure, you find a way to cope in an unhealthy way. Then your family finds out it's an uncomfortable situation. There's a lot of lecturing. There's a lot of you shoulda, woulda, couldas, right? And from that point on, no matter what you do, unless it's addressed, I feel like therapeutically in an environment, whether it's a coach or a therapist, there's just always this underlying anxiety that there's something wrong with me. I'm the black sheep in the family. I'm the cast out, right? I'm sure a lot of your guys' adolescents that come to you feel that way because why can't I just be normal? Why can't I go to a normal high school or junior high or?
Right.
Is that accurate?
Yeah. And then I think it snowballs because from that pain, it's a pain trigger. You dip back into the tools that you use to solve the pain. When we map that out for the parent, they go, oh, okay, I get it. Okay. So I'm going to try not to control this time. This time I'm going to try and just talk about what's going on. I'm going to try and figure out where the anxiety and the frustration is and help them work it out in their mind, especially as the teenagers who don't have that frontal lobe developed. They can't see the end all picture, and help them feel empowered to make a decision rather than feeling controlled, because we know with the teens that feel overly controlled, that also puts them in a spin, right?
Yeah.
So we just are trying to help parents, like, instead of doing the knee-jerk reaction, it's like we talk about in the book, it's like being in an airplane 10,000 feet up. What do you see? Well, not much. But once you start to go on the landing, you're like, oh, there's a convenience store. There's people walking around. There's just so much to that story that you see. So we ask, don't react in that situation if someone's had a relapse and start taking things away. Go, wait, what was that about? Or what's happening? And also get curious enough that when they give you an excuse, there may be something under that iceberg that's even more to the point. Right. And helping them dissect that, like Josh says, with the language that they're using to understand what they're really talking about.
Yeah. So where does the disconnect come from? So I guess your target audience is, let's just go with parents for now. Let's just take a traditional family, for example. Parents come in and they write a big check to somebody to fix their kid, right? And so they send them off and fix my kid. But during the family structure, then the parent comes in and says, look, I've loved Johnny all his life and I've provided him everything he needs. And now all of a sudden here he is at 15. The only person he trusts is his drug dealer. Where does that come from? Like, where does Johnny lose the connection with the family and get a connection to people that really aren't his friends or aren't as invested in him as his family?
Josh, go ahead.
I think that it's a really good question. And it makes me think of just some stories of kids that I've worked with over the years who, had their drug dealer on speed dial versus their mom or their dad, right? As somebody who they would call and connect with. These kids are on Twitch or these gaming sites and they're learning how to play video games or getting relationship advice and getting a plug for something that they're wanting to get fulfilled in terms of a drug or something. They're finding these ways to connect, right? So when you're asking about what the disconnection is, at some point in time, the parents personalized the struggle that was going on with the teen. And then it just starts to just pull away.
I have provided Johnny everything he needs.
Right. And so they personalized his struggle and made it about them versus making it about what's actually going on. And like Hollie was just explaining, is that they go in and they start looking at everything from a 10,000 foot view. It's like, oh man, he's got a house, he's got an Xbox, he's going to a great school, we got him a car, he should be fine. But when you get down into the weeds, you start to see like, hey, X happened to him at school the other day. He's got a learning difference that he can't really, that's undiagnosed. Something is going on where something is not connecting. It is causing the anxiety. It is causing the stress in his life and the discomfort, and he or she wants that gone. And so they're going to, just like water, they're going to go to whatever is the easiest way for them to feel that way. And because mom and dad have personalized the struggle, it's no longer a safe place for them to go. And then couple that with individuation, which any teenager is trying to do and trying to be on their own and trying to figure out like, oh, okay, like who am I? What am I about? Trying to be authentic. They're naturally going to be pushing their parents away and go towards something else that we always say in the book, like, what is the loudest voice? And those louder voices sometimes are what's on social media, what's cool, whatever's trending. And unfortunately, that could be drugs, alcohol, and a myriad of other things.
And I think the thing that we also talk about in the book is that there's so many different scenarios. So that could be one scenario. You could have another scenario of a family where you've got perfectionism that is really advertised, right? And you have maybe other siblings showing up in a way that everybody, mom and dad are happy. And then you could have a child that feels very different about themselves and the way they are showing up and feel shame and not wanting to have those conversations. And then the way that the parents interact with the teen can create that disconnect gap, so that the teen's going then to wherever they're going to feel safe.
And the hardest thing, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Josh.
No, I just think the hardest thing for most parents to admit, and why we wrote the book, is that it's really hard to admit that that relationship is no longer safe. And we try to help them rebuild that in the book, and that's in the other parts as well. And so there's something about the relationship that just doesn't feel safe, whether it's the perfectionism, whether it's the personalization, whether it's the just totally being, like passive and avoidant of what's going on, right? Something no longer felt safe enough to be able to approach. And like I said, couple that with natural teenage individuation, and it becomes quite the cocktail.
How do we rebuild that? I mean, by the time that the parents understand there's a giant problem, the kid's already disconnected. Like the relationship already feels unsafe to them, right? So where as a parent do I turn to start making that connection better?
You want me to take that, Josh? Because I think about it in my own situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I was away from home, I was done with my parents. If I never had to see them again, it was a good day. And it's amazing that we were able to come back and connect. The very first thing that changed the most for me was that they were willing to show up and accept their part. So apology goes a long way in saying, hey, you know what? We may have done things in a way that might not have been helpful for our relationship. We're willing to take ownership of that. We're sorry for that. You know, parents need to, if they can take the ownership as the leader of the family, it goes huge. That doesn't mean that the teen's ready to trust, but you've started to perk the ear. And then when you start to see the parent do the work, and they start to do things differently than they did before, notice when they're getting triggered, notice how the way that they've been conditioned by their parents and how they grew up, when they're dipping into that and when it's unhealthy, stepping back and going like, I'm not going to do like we did before. I want a healthier relationship. Then the teen says things are starting to change, because usually the teen will give a lot until they realize there's no hope. So you want to open up that door for them to hope that things could be different in the future.
I actually think in any relationship dynamic, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a significant other, whether it's a loved one, family member, anytime there's a rift in a relationship, typically as soon as one person can step up and take accountability and start that amends process, usually things will move in the right direction, right? But one person's got to give it first. I feel like that's true in most relationships.
Yeah. And in this case, with the dynamic of parent and teen, it has to be the parents. They need to lead out. A lot of parents have so much hurt with what's been going on that they don't want to take that step. But they are in charge of that system, that culture, and their family. So, and the teen already feels inadequate, already feels angry, and doesn't even have all the tools that they need to have these healthy relationships yet. So the parent needs to lead out first and show them that they can be vulnerable and they can change.
Well, and like you said, their frontal cortex hasn't even fully developed yet, right? Like they're not completely logical. They're acting off of emotion quite a bit, right? They haven't really developed
exactly.
that. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Josh?
We see it all the time where we get calls, like an intake call from somebody, and they're like, hey, my kid's struggling and things like that. And it's just that same concept of, let me just write you a check, or can you take this over? And I think that there's just that responsibility to take that breath and realize that I'm part of this. I can start here. I can set that example. And a lot of what Hollie and I do is we become a buffer to help that process start. So when we start working with a young person, we kind of take that parental, that caring role on for a little bit as a coach, and just like give the kid a safe space to kind of unload. And we, like we said, start to decode their language and start to understand what's going on with them, what traumas, what pains they have, while the parents are catching up to the point where they can have that conversation and say, I'm ready to start anew. Like, I'm ready to look past. I'm not going to over-identify with any of the things that were happening in the past. But we're just going to try to create a new culture here. And like Hollie said in her situation, I've always seen, and it's not always perfect, but I know most teens are willing to give things another chance if they can really trust and see that some steps have been made on the parents end or on the caretakers end, because they need to see a little bit of work in order to kind of meet them in that place.
So leads into a question that I have, and you've started to answer it already, but how is it that you guys then are able to connect with the teen when the teen's own parents can't do that?
It's, I don't know exactly if, I mean, I studied advertising. I've been through coaching courses where they teach you how to listen, right? I think I've been able to use my life experiences to connect with people. And whenever I talk with somebody in an intake call, you know, especially now during COVID, where it's just by Zoom and they meet somebody by Zoom for the first time, I just give them a sense of who I am, and I let them know what I'm about and what's important to me, and that I'm curious about them. And that curiosity is key. That they actually will know that I'm not just going to listen, be a third parent, or just be a phone line to from them to the kid, to them to the parent, saying exactly, you know, just parroting back whatever was told to me. But I let them know this is a safe space. I give them a view of who I am and what I've been through, and we just go from there. And yeah, it works. I mean, I'm the one that gets the phone calls at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. when some kid's cutting in the bathtub, unfortunately having to talk kids through attempted suicides and getting them safe and all those different things. Like Hollie and I have both had these experiences where we act as that buffer until, like we said, the family culture and the caretakers can catch up.
Interesting. Hollie,
So,
did you have
yeah,
something?
you've got also, like when we introduce book 2, it's really going to be about, it's called Cracking the Communication Code. There are oftentimes things parents will say and do with intention behind it that they think nobody knows, that will communicate to a teen in a way that turns them away. So I was talking to another mom this morning who was concerned about some of the stuff that her daughter was putting online. And the way that she said it to her daughter, she was really surprised that her daughter was reactive. And I was able to just decode a few words and say, hey, you know, when you said these few things, this is how it feels. What was your intention in communicating this? And so I think that makes us a little bit different in being able, as a coach, versus what parents are struggling with when they're communicating with their loved one, is that we don't have the same type of tie and love ties that they have to their kids. We respect these teens, but we don't have any ulterior motive or agenda we want to push through. So it just allows us to be present with them. But we can teach parents how to do that.
Okay, so I'm a mom of a teen girl, okay? Which is clear. None of those things are true. But my daughter posted a picture online that I'm not happy with, and my response to that is, why would you put a picture that slutty online?
Ooh.
So coach me through that, please.
Yeah, my first thing is, let's stop with the word why, because the minute that you say why, the ball goes up, right?
Okay.
If you were to use the term, tell me more about this photo. Tell me more about, when you put it up. I want to get more context about where you were, what the intention was. I want to start talking about, tell me a little bit more about what your friends are posting. Tell me how important it is to post these types of things. And then I would want to, if my intention is to teach, like as a parent, you always want to say, what is my intention in this moment that I want to bring this up? I'm uncomfortable that she's posting something really at the very core, what I fear the most is that someone's going to take advantage of the person I love the most.
Mm-hmm.
That they're going to see them in a way that isn't accurate. And I want to prevent them from that pain, experiencing that pain, right? So normally I'd be like, why'd you do this? This is slutty. Do you know how people, see this? Well, this is a lot of shaming. And what happens with the teen, they're like, I'm out.
Yeah.
But if you can get a little bit more curious about the what and help them formulate the picture, because that frontal lobe is not strong. So you want them to see like, well, what do you think people think about this photo? What would you think about this type of photo? Sometimes we can bring up things in pop culture. What do you think people are thinking about this kind of information on the web? So there's ways to address that issue that's a bit more creative than coming out like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. But
okay.
Josh, how would you tackle that?
Well, we actually just did a whole video on how to start conversations, like difficult conversations. And obviously posting something like that online is a super, super difficult conversation. And so, like Holly said, curiosity is the number one thing that should be driving this, but how you start the conversation is number one in my book. And so if you need to take a breath, if you need to disengage, if you don't have that conversation for 2 days, then you don't start it until you know that you can come from it in a loving and compassionate and curious way. And having those filters set up instead of reactionary and in the moment, which is really hard for us to do because like Holly said, we're trying to protect somebody who we feel like could be in danger and some of our greatest fears are being possibly realized. And I always just say to parents when we're working with them and we've decoded their language, just like Holly did with your question to that hypothetical teen girl, well, hey, like, how could we start that again? How could you actually start a conversation that's going to allow for them to be more than just yes, no, or to walk away? And so I'm just really a big fan of learning how to start conversations. And maybe we can put in your show notes or whatever, the video that we just started. And it just goes over a bunch of hard topics and how to start those conversations in a way that will create and foster communication.
Where is that video? How do people find that?
Holly's going to be better on that one because I am the tech, not the tech person sometimes.
If they go to joshandholly.com and they sign the mailing list, it'll automatically be sent out to them as a gift for signing up.
joshandhollie.com, HOLLIE.
Yep. Josh and Holly, yeah.
Okay.
But I was going to add to that, sometimes in parenting with teens, it's not even about the direct conversation. It's about finding the opportunity to bring up something in, let's say, Josh, I remember you telling a story when you were going down to Mexico and you had some of the boys you wanted to talk to about pornography, and you cross over in the border and tell them what happens and the point that you're able to make.
Well, I mean, Tijuana is one of the largest sex trades in the world. So a lot of people fly into San Diego and within 15 minutes you're in Tijuana and you can have whatever you want. So a lot of these kids that I was working with are either working with like sex addictions, pornography addictions, things like that. And so as we went to these orphanage and they were actually playing soccer with these kids and making a meal and sitting down beside them, they were actually working alongside the physical, real consequences of pornography and sex addictions and all those different things. Because a lot of those kids were taken out of horrible, horrible situations in Tijuana and other places, right? And so to make things real, and you guys can cut me off if I'm going the wrong direction with this, but I just kind of want to bring it back to what we were talking about in terms of just like that conversation, because it was real and it was concrete and they could connect with it versus it just being accusatory or whatever is kind of what Holly and I teach best. My dad did a good job of just like taking me on drives every Sunday when I was a teen, and we didn't have to talk, but I always knew it was a time where I could talk. And so it's just about your timing, and it's about it just not coming in it right away, but then just to create a culture that says, hey, we're going to go to ice cream and we're going to talk about some tough stuff. And I'm going to try to make it land a little bit better and a lot better, but I'm going to start to create these traditions like I did with these youth in Mexico when I would take them down to Africa or Peru to actually put them in physical situations where they could see what the drug trade was doing and what they could see what alcohol was doing, like in Zambia where alcohol is given out in little packets like water and it's cheaper than water. And we were just going from house to house working with inebriated people, and the consequences of that really have impact. It's not about what I said, it was the situation. that
good.
talked versus
The
me.
experience. Yeah.
Hey, we're getting short on time, unfortunately, but there's a couple of quick things I'd like to explore if we can get to them. We got about a minute and a half left, but the first is, let me tell you what I heard out of what you guys said is, in conversations with a teen, drop the judgment. Don't hit them with an accusation or drop that completely and be more curious. Is that sound like something you were trying to tell us?
I would say even more with teens, just a coworker.
Sure.
Your wife,
Sure.
husband.
In relationships.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's great advice right there.
Don't
That's a
ask
golden
such
nugget.
judgmental questions. Okay. And then we got 30 seconds left. I'm going to ask you really quickly. We got 50 seconds left, but really quickly. You have mentioned a couple of times coaching, and that's a different style than kind of what we're used to because we come from this era where everyone had a therapist, right? And you guys mentioned that you do coaching. Tell me the difference.
For me, it's going on a hike with somebody, doing something hard, doing some service, going for a surf, and being able to be experiential and exposure with those people versus in just a therapist's office where they can tell you what you want to hear. Coaching is just so, I feel like I can connect so much more as a coach.
Okay, thanks.
I think coaching with therapy is the way that we're going. Therapy is so important.
Hey, we're about out of time. Tell us how to get a hold of you one more time.
Okay. JoshandHollie.com. You can get a hold of us.
Beautiful. Sorry, we're out of time. Thanks for our guests, Josh Brazier,
Thank you.
Hollie
Yeah.
Henderson. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today on We Do Recover with Jared Miller.
Help us spread our message of hope. Like, comment, and share.
If you have any topics or ideas for future shows, please share that on our Facebook page.
That Facebook page is We Do Recover with Jared Miller. If you or a loved one needs help, please reach out to us. Again, thank you for listening.
Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center and the St. George Hilton Garden Inn. This has been a production from a podcast studio.